Now you're very welcome along to the Huddle Breakdown. Enda here in the company of Jiko James and Alan Morrison. As always, we have a huge Scottish Cup final to look ahead to on the podcast today. We also will be looking back at the last couple of weeks, really, of the season. Celtic are champions since the last time we spoke, I think. And the season is over. The league season is over, the longest season of all time. They seem to be getting longer and longer. The more stress that is involved, the more prolonged the season seems to be. And there was a lot of stress this season. And so we're going to be looking back at the post split form heading into the Scottish Cup final. It seems, as always, that Celtic are finishing the season strong. And thankfully for us, it seems like our opponents on Saturday are finishing the season quite poorly, to be honest. So we're going to be picking that apart and seeing what it means on today's show. Alan, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I fascinated that you mentioned the Scottish Cup final. Uh, I had kind of thought I'd fallen asleep and missed it. If I look at the Scottish sports media, it's difficult to get any sense that there's a game at all. I thought and in fact, I thought we'd jumped straight into the magnificence that is the pre-season cup because all I'm seeing is stories about massive investment at Ibrox and a slew of new signings to get everybody giddy about, and hardly any mention of the Scottish Cup final of which you speak, Enda. So I'm glad it wasn't me that's just kind of fallen asleep and missed the game because that's what it feels like.
Well, James, there is also an FA Cup final on this weekend, so maybe we could look ahead to that instead, in case we have missed the Scottish Cup final.
Well, I heard you have tickets to the Man United game. That's the rumor I heard going around. It's such an important game for you that you're flying over to Wembley. Is that rumor true?
Well, I did say I have tickets. What I did mean was I have tickets for the Scottish Cup final. Much to
Oh, okay. All
the
right.
absolute dismay of some of the people in the comments that get angry at me not attending every single Celtic match, despite me living in a different country. I do have, in fact, nabbed myself some tickets for the Scottish Cup final, so I'm very, very much looking forward to that. Um, Even though it does appear that it is going ahead, Alan. By the way, I can confirm that. I've just checked it, just double
Excellent.
checked to make sure that we weren't doing this podcast in vain. So, look, I mean, it's nice that we can joke on this podcast again that Celtic are champions of Scotland once again, and the stress of the season is over. Alan, I know that the last couple of weeks you were just talking about getting the job done, but I think we might pick it apart a little bit more on today's podcast. What do we think? We get into the nitty gritty.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, we kind of, we did, I would say, metaphorically, pretty much race over the line, and it wasn't as stressful as it could have been, for sure.
Hmm. I
Well,
mean,
but before we move on to this, Andy, because this is an important detail, is Liam with this bumper new contract that he signed? Is Liam sending his helicopter for you or his plane?
no, I'm actually I'm traveling over. I'm meeting him before the game, and I'm going into the dressing room and just making sure he's okay and the nerves are settled and everything's all good. He's in great form, so he is.
You're not flying commercial, are you?
Oh Jesus, no!
Oh, okay. That's what
I'm
I
on
thought.
the
Okay.
I'm on
Okay.
the I'm on the 6 a.m. Ryanair flight from Dublin, like everyone else. So uh,
Ah,
I'm not that much of a big wig just yet.
mm, shocker.
Right. We'll get into some football, will we? Because it's been a big couple of weeks for Celtic. The 5-0 win against Kilmarnock was absolutely sensational. The 3-2 win against St. Mirren was classic end of the season. Nothing really matters sort of performance. But, I mean, there is some, talking points from that at least. Not least mentioning the starting lineup and the three across the back that we appear to have gone for and the results of that. So we might talk about that. And I guess the starting lineup against St. Mirren was actually more interesting based on who was not in the starting lineup as opposed to who was actually in it, because that appears to be who's going to be starting in the final against Rangers tomorrow. So the last couple of weeks, what are we making of the post split Celtic? I mean, it seemed like, and we spoke about this, but we kind of brushed over the stats of it all, or even the in-depth chat about it all, the underlying performance, which we usually talk about because we just wanted to get over the line. We just wanted to get the wins under the table. But Alan, we did speak about an upward trend for Celtic in those 6 weeks. We spoke about players coming back, fitness levels being up. and the general level of performance for Celtic was on the upward trend in those final few weeks.
You know, undoubtedly, and yeah, I think the St Mirren game was a case of giving players legs an outing that will likely be used even just as substitutes. Um, so I wouldn't read too much into that. But yeah, I mean, it's after the Hearts defeat, the John Beaton special, the re-refereed match. 34 goals in 11 games. 3 goals a game, and yes, we conceded quite a few as well. But um, I did a piece today on Celtic Way. It just looked at the sort of XG trends for and against over the season, and the good news has been that that's all been trending the right way for Celtic the longer the season has gone on, i.e. that expected goals for is kind of going like that, expected goals against is going like that, and very much was consistent really when the games really mattered around at the end of the season, especially the post-split games. So obviously there were a few ups and downs. We had quite a bit of a golden period, sort of in autumn time, and then late autumn time, and then we know that we had that dip in February, where everybody was getting giddy about the prospect of Celtic being toppled from their perch and all that. So, but over the piece, we started the season really in that kind of what I'd call danger zone of XG differential being around about one. I we're generating about one XG more than what we're conceding, and that just not quite being enough to account for the potential negative variances that can happen during a football match. But as we've gone to the season's end, that's gone up to 1.5, and 1.5 you're starting to get into the territory where you can absorb some of that negative variance, whether it be goalkeeping performances at either end, refereeing decisions, or bad finishing or great finishing, depending on what side you're on, etc. You can absorb more of these bad outcomes because you're simply generating that much many more quality chances that you're likely be on the right end of the score. A reminder that under Ange we kind of got up to two differential of +2 xg on it as an average, so that's kind of where we want to get to. But the point being is that if you want to look at it holistically over the season, uh, if you were writing Brendan Rodgers' report card, then what you'd say is that the team is improving at both ends of the pitch, and what you can't really ask for more than that, to be honest. So that was the general Celtic trend. It's a good news story. We're moving in the right direction. I think it's interesting to me. This feels very much like Postecoglou's first season in the sense that we've got a playing squad that's far too large, players out on loan, all that. And what Postecoglou did essentially was he relied on 17 players. And once injuries had been worked through and he sorted wheat from chaff, he basically had 17 players. And we're kind of in the same place now. There's a very small core of
Mm-hmm.
players that played a lot of minutes, and there's a lot of players that have played not many minutes in the squad. And I know we're getting into the preseason, but that just needs to be sorted. It needs to, there's a huge number of players that clearly aren't going to contribute that we need to get rid of. So we're there because I think of consistency. The team is coherent in and of itself. There's glaring weaknesses in personnel, but again, we're just in a place that because of everybody's fit and because of form and that cohesion, that we're able to kind of lessen the impact of some of those weaknesses just because we've got that consistency throughout the team now.
Mm. Well, it's funny that you mentioned that because one of the things that I had mentioned on this podcast before was just not losing games. Celtic haven't lost that many games this season. And if you look back over the last decade, there's only one season, or 2 seasons rather, that a team has lost more than 4 games and still gone on to win the league. Celtic have lost 3 games this season. Rangers have lost 7. So that's the key differentiator between Celtic and Rangers this season. And it's funny that you mention the first season under Ange because I was looking at the table and I was thinking that looks very familiar. Celtic's record this season is exactly the same as Ange Postecoglou's in his first season. So Ange's first season finished with 6 draws, 3 defeats, and 93 points. exact same as Brendan Rodgers this year. The goal difference for Ange's first season, or the goals for in Ange's first season, 92 goals scored, 22 goals conceded. This season, it was 95 goals scored, 30 conceded. So slightly better going forward, slightly worse in defense. I think that's likely what we probably can see, in this team. Slightly worse in defense. I wouldn't have guessed that they scored more goals. I'll be honest with that. But this would indicate that, you know what, even though there were some ups and downs throughout the season, some bad periods that we had to, weather the storm of, James, it's actually that this season is actually par for the course, really. Like, not our best season, but still quite good, really, in the grand scheme of things.
Pretty much, once if you look at the squad when we had periods of the majority of our best players playing, um, meaning that Hatate, Carter Vickers, McGregor, um, we were performing kind of peak Ange period. As Alan was saying, we were kind of in that, you know, between 2.1 to 2.25 xG created on average per game, approaching that 0.12 xG per shot and 0.08 and xG per shot conceded. That gap, and we talked about that early in the season where that had actually inverted, which was really concerning. The average chance quality was going that we were conceding was marginally higher for the opposition than what we were creating. And particularly in these, and I've called it kind of the I am calling it, I haven't done a thread yet on it, I probably will after this gets released, is a tale of 2 9-game periods. If you look at our first 9 games of the season and you look at Rangers' last 9 games of the season, there's some difference. Obviously, they had 2 derbies, we only had one. Ours was theirs was post split, ours wasn't. So there's some differences, but just generally speaking, to Alan's point, looking at the impact of variance once you have performance levels get to that magic level, it's really instructive to examine those 2 periods. And during those 9 games, we dropped 2 points in the first 9 games of the season. I think that was the St. Johnston draw, and they dropped 12 points. And that it's a nice kind of narrative storytelling. Putting a pin in the season, because it was, you start those 9 games. It was after that weekend when they lost to Motherwell, and then, as Alan said, we had the John Beaton special at Tynecastle against Hearts, and from that point forward, it was the last 9 games. And during that 9 game period, again, when we had all these players return, we performed at that level that was kind of peak Ange. And they dropped back to, the worst of our 2020-2021 season. And that was similar to how we played in those first 9 games. And the main driver of the distinction between those 2 periods, meaning that why we only dropped 2 points and they dropped 12, was finishing. And a secondary part was keeper play. So during our 9 game stretch earlier this season, the opposition did not finish well at all, pretty horrible. Our finishing was excellent. That was worth about 3/4 of a goal per game, that gap over 9 games. So again, you're talking about let's say 7 goals over a 9 game period. And if you go back and look at those games, there was 3 or 4 where that was the difference between a draw, and a loss. And during their stretch, opposition finishing was pretty much as expected. And despite the narrative, Butland was absolutely horrible. And if you combine those two, that's how they basically dropped 12 points, where structurally they were kind of performing. So, and even if you look at some of the underlying drivers of what had happened, we've talked about this last week. They were missing their front 3 for pretty much this entire stretch, and for a big chunk of it, they're starting 2 center backs. Sounds kind of familiar, right? We had huge missing important players during that 9 game stretch earlier in the season. So yeah, it's this funny thing where you have your best players and you have a good manager. That's kind of the recipe, and we perform just like that in over the last 9 games, and that's that gap between us doing that where we immunized ourselves against variance, whereas they were in that danger zone, and they had uh, both bad luck and controllable factors, i.e., Butland, that
Mm.
swung pretty horribly wrong, and that was a 10-point gap over a 9-game stretch.
So how we measure all this is our good friend XG and XG differential and post shot XG, all the things that the people love to listen to this show for. Um, in terms of, so if we look at what James has just said, Alan,
Mm.
how much of this is down to good quality shot creation, which is where the XG comes in, and having players like Matt O'Reilly and Kyogo, and just having generally better players than Rangers?
Yeah, I mean that's massive, as James has said. Funny that you get all your best players back and you the team starts playing a lot better. There's that. There's
It's
Yeah, it's
crazy.
crazy.
It's crazy.
That is football, right? At the end of the day, but a lot of it's to do with cohesion as well. But also there is a bit. There's some environmental stuff. I would again. I've come back to this theme over and over again, and as the season's gone on, that whatever has been going on at Celtic, and however patchy virtually all the performances have been, really. I mean, very few solid 90-minute consistent performances. There's been ups and downs in each game. Um, but what has never changed has been sort of Brendan Rodgers' general demeanour, attitude, the way he projects himself. It's always seemed to me to be very calm, under control. The players have always seemed pretty confident. No one's looked rattled or worried or concerned. Whereas, on the other side of the city, we've had the occasional explosion of irrationality. We've had players told that they're come to the end of their cycle when there's still a major football match to be played, and all that stuff, which can't help. And these are the non-performance factors, if you like, and the stuff that James hates. But and the keeper, I think the keeper play isn't to be underestimated. I mean, there is no doubt that Joe Hart is summoning up every last sinew of his ability and his will to finish his career, on as high a point as he can. There's no doubt about that. His performance levels have he's, I'm not wanting to damn with faint praise, because I think we've been very consistent in reporting the reality of Hart's performances, which is cold data versus people focus on him as a man, this amazing, warm kind of leader, which and we have to kind of separate the things if we're talking about performance a little bit. Um, and he's kind of gone from slightly below average compared to SPFL keepers to slightly above average compared to SPFL keepers. But that's great. Those are tiny margins, but these are impactful margins at this level. And as I say, Butland's gone in the opposite direction for them. And then, James talked about luck there, but I'm not having the injury situation at Ibrox. I'm not labeling that down to luck, because they chose, for budgetary reasons, to decimate their sports science function, and therefore this is on them. This is the choices they made. They released an enormous number of young players at the end of last season, and they decimated certain functions, backroom functions, because they wanted to spend more money on football players who've been here before. Right? They made that choice. Okay, they made that choice, and it's not worked out because they knew the importance of this league and they've thrown everything at it. So that's not luck. That's just bad management of a football club. So, but that has had a telling factor. I mean, as James says, if you look at the Rangers' XG differential, especially really from the moment Clement came in and played a more solid 4-2-3-1, where he had always had two sitters in front of the back four as insurance, their XG against was remarkably low, but it's just exploded in the last couple of months of the season. It's gone up like that. And simply, because I don't know what their personnel are going to be tomorrow, but it could be like a young kid at left back, Davis, King, and Captain Disappointed on the right. I mean that's that's I mean that's barely a kind of St Mirren level defence, frankly. So, and that's had an impact, as has Butland's form as well. So, pleasingly for Celtic is that the two teams are going in opposite directions as far as XG differential, but for them it's really almost fallen off a cliff as the season's gone by. And I looked also at their, if you look at pressing, so pressing, just volume of pressing, but also regains, and actually the two clubs are pretty consistent throughout the season, but theirs just falls off right at the tail end of the season. It's almost as if and that's really where this is where you really put in the hard yards, right? This is where you're in pressing off the ball is where there's no glory in that, right? It's just hard work, and their pressing has just dropped off the cliff right at the very end. It's just the tail's gone down. You've got a squad full of players that are looking at the next contract, or players that have been told that they're end of their cycle. I suspect that's kind of what happens. So all the piece I wrote today, Celtic Way, was all about trying to really destroy this myth that form goes out the window for these derbies. It fucking doesn't, right? It never has. They battered us in the 90s. It was 50-50 in the 2000s, and we pretty much battered the new club. As soon as they got up to the league. Other than the COVID season, they were clearly superior, and we got battered. Right? It goes to form. It nearly always. There's very few upsets. I counted, against the new club. There's been like 40 derbies, and I think there's probably been 3 upsets. There's been the penalties FA Cup semi-final under Dyla that Celtic lost. There was the Bobby Madden special at the Ange, the cup semi-final that we lost in extra time. Carl Starfoot's own goal, and then I would argue that us winning at Ibrox in September was a bit of a shock, given the state of the two teams. People may disagree, but I think those are the only 3 shocks in the 40 derbies we've played against this Rangers. So, long story short, is these matches tend to go to form, and the form directions of these two clubs are going in quite extreme polar opposite directions.
Yeah, I'll just
Yeah.
clarify real quick, and if that's okay, because my comment as to luck was specifically intended relative to opposition finishing. So that part of this was quote unquote worth about 4 goals over that 9-game stretch. And if you look at the number of 1-goal games in those 2 relative periods, that's where again it wouldn't have been league determining, but the gap between them dropping 12 points and us dropping 2, with kind of underlying structural things being similar, those 4 goals could have made it them only dropping 4 points or 6 points,
Mhm.
something like that. So it was more so that opponents, and again, that's I've talked about this and I've written about this. That's an uncontrollable variance, right? You can't control how your opponents are finishing in a direct way, and some of that's just kind of random swinging around that takes place. Um, so yeah, that was specifically what I was referencing. And if you're going to talk about kind of the qualitative part of it, our finishing did. I mean, we were really good in our finishing, and how much of that is players dialing in, how much of it's players up for the challenge of the title. I mean, you can kind of write that script however you want. Some of it could just be variance as well, that kind of thing. But our finishing in those last 9 games that were league winning stretch was really good. Um,
Mm.
and theirs was just kind of as expected. So that's more specifically what I was referencing. That difference between what can you control and then what can't you control. And the stuff you can't control can be bad luck. And I would say that component of what happened with Rangers in the last 9 games was most likely just bad luck.
Mhm. Well, you mentioned 12-point swing. I mentioned the amount of defeats that Rangers have suffered this year. 3 of them have come at the hands of Celtic, and 1 draw. So that's a 10-point swing right there, just in the derbies alone. Um, Almost 50% of their defeats this year came at the hands of Celtic. So if you, as Alan is saying, like if you look at the actual derbies in terms of form, except for I would say the one at Ibrox too, because it's laughable on their behalf that Celtic came away with a win, given the form and the situation, everything went into that, and that's where I think all of the indescribable and immeasurable stuff comes in the mentality of things, because I think like James Tavernier, for example, is probably the person I have seen look most forlorn out of any person in my lifetime. I don't think I've ever seen one sports person look so frustrated and annoyed on such a consistent basis over the last 10 years as him, because of a mistake that happened or a goal that Celtic was scored. It just keeps happening, and that can't be a coincidence. And that's where I think the likes of Matt O'Reilly, Kyogo, Cal McGregor, Joe Hart, all the experienced players come in the experience. Even just if if you wanted to take my mentality of just experience of being there, of dealing with pressure. I'm currently reading the book 12 Rings, or 11 Rings. It's by the Bulls head coach and LA Lakers head coach. His name is escaping me right now. You'll probably know,
Phil Jackson. Yeah.
James. Yeah,
Yeah.
Phil Jackson. And like, if you look at where when he went to the Bulls and when you look at when he went to the Lakers, one of the key things he did in his title winning runs was bringing in experienced players. He brought 4 Bulls to the Lakers and then went on and won. That's not a coincidence. That's experience, because these players know how to do it. They've been there. They've done it. They deal with the pressure. Whereas the Rangers players have only ever dealt with failure. So when that starts to creep in pressure moments, that's where I think luck starts to swing.
So you've opened the door beautifully for you know, in a quiet moment this week. It has been entertaining to consume some of the Ibrox podcasts, and oh my goodness, are they suffering? No, nobody thinks they're going to win this game. Anyway, putting that to one side, you don't often get, even like you've just described there, and actually reading a book and educating yourself, you don't get a lot of that, I have to say, as a general rule in Rangers podcasts. But this wee lad, and I can't remember the name of the podcast, to be honest with you, but he started talking about a neuroscience concept called learned helplessness. And he absolutely nailed it. And it's exactly what you're talking about. It learned helplessness is this cognitive state where you've been disappointed so many times that you just can't unlearn going through that experience over and over and over again. And it's exactly the mindset that Captain Disappointed is in, is that it doesn't matter who's wearing that green shirt. A game of football has got 22 players and a ball. It lasts for 90 minutes, and at the end of that, Celtic win. And that's the learned helplessness of the and it's their best players, their most experienced players, the Goldsons, the Taverniers, the Barisics, the Lundstrom, have all got this learned helplessness about playing Celtic. Um, and this is I'm joking, right? This is a serious you know mental illness, linked to clinical depression. So I'm kind of being I'm trivializing something that's very important, but the concept of exactly what you talked about, a group of players just when playing a certain opponent just are conditioned almost to defeat, because Celtic have not been at their coherent best throughout the season, but even in the derby games, they've got a lead and then they've tended to sort of just footer about for just for 30 minutes, 60 minutes, and kind of see the games out in a very untidy way, I would say. The game at Celtic Park just gone, O'Reilly's got a chance to put Celtic 3-1 up against him, and that could have gone on to be a proper walloping. But we didn't, and so the games look like they're really close. But again, observing the players and observing their reactions, one side looks quite relatively calm and in control of their emotions and know what they're doing. The other is like you say, consumed with this this learned helplessness, which yeah, I'm going to use from now on, I think.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, th- I do think this all plays a part in it, and it certainly it certainly plays a part in some of the players in their team. So we'll have to wait and see what happens tomorrow. Will we continue on until tomorrow, or is there anything else off the last few weeks that you just want to touch on specifically before we move on to the final preview?
think it,
No, I'm
I
good.
think it's just
Let's talk about tomorrow.
sorry, James. Just very quickly echoing what one of the things
Yeah.
when you said, Enda, which is, if you look at the players whose performance levels in the data have kind of risen as the tension has risen, it has been that core, that experienced core of Hart, Carter Vickers, McGregor, O'Reilly, and now you would say as a leader in that team, Kyogo. It's and James Forrest, of course. Let's not forget James
I was
Forrest.
going to say Forrest was
Yeah,
seminal,
yeah.
I would
And
argue, in
listen, this
yeah.
isn't this isn't actually complicated neuroscience. These are the most experienced guys. These are the guys that know how to get this done. And guess what? They've done it, right?
And
Yeah,
talent.
Yeah.
Talent is what I would say. Ultimately, talent rules the day
But it's
the
experience.
vast majority of the
It's
time.
knowing how
Yep.
to how to approach these things, knowing what it takes, not being scared, not being
yeah.
scared to
It's how to
take the
get the
risks.
best out of your talent at the right times. Because I mean, look, here's the thing: the Rangers players are talented. I never speak too harshly about professional footballers because they are a 1% talent in the world doing something at the elite level. There is an elite level above the Scottish League, no doubt about it, but they're still elite players. But you have to know how to get the best out of your talent at the best times. And I think that's probably where Celtic have um, done the best over the course of the season. And I was going to save this for my final year review podcast, but I'll say it now. Even Celtic's lesser talented players have gotten more out of themselves this year than the other side of the city, and no least Greg Taylor. Because I was watching the final game against St. Mirren, and he was the one that stood out to me in terms of the team sheet because you had three changes at the back. You had Welsh coming in at centre back for Cameron Carter Vickers. Anthony Ralston came in at right back, and we had Liam Scales drop out of the squad, and they're clearly going to be playing in the final. They're the three names that Celtic are going to be replacing in the final. And then you had Greg Taylor still starting at left back in a game that didn't matter. And what sprung to mind for me is that Greg Taylor may have been inadvertently Celtic's most important player this season after Matt O'Reilly, because even though we can all agree that he is not good enough to be someone who brings Celtic forward in the league or forward in in Europe, particularly in the amount of chaos that Celtic have had this season, he was starting pretty much every single game and giving pretty much a consistent performance throughout the entire season. Can you imagine how chaotic Celtic's defense would have been if Greg Taylor was as inconsistent as some of the other players in the squad this year, or inconsistent as some of the players in the Rangers squad this year? He's consistent in the amount of minutes that he plays. He's consistent in the lack of injuries. And even though we can all agree that we can get a better performance out of a better player, we get a 6 to 7 out of 10 performance from Greg Taylor every single week. And sometimes that's more important in a title running winning squad than somebody. Let's say Burnaby was a world beater, but we only got 7 to 8 good games out of him a season. He's not. Let's be honest, he's not. But if he was, I think I'd still take Greg Taylor, who's going to give you a 7 out of 10 for 20 games out of the long season, than somebody who's going to give it for half that.
100% agree. Yeah, I mean, I relative to the domestic title race, I've couched it in, um, you know, baseball terms in the past, but the kind of replacement level players, as I've said, and that's Greg Taylor. Like for a left back at Celtic domestically, he's kind of a perfect profile for that. He's consistent. He's available. I mean that fitness is a skill in a sense for um, many players. Are they living the 24/7 lifestyle, that kind of thing? And but from all accounts, he does. He's a very serious professional. Takes his job and commitment. Um, you know, um, Prioritizes it, and I, yeah, for those type of people, I mean, Scales, I think this season as well. I mean, for to be able to be available the vast majority of the time and to be relatively consistent, even if they're not at a level that I think we'd all aspire to, there's huge value. And it, theoretically, that's also the value. Look at, Ralston. Ralston's similar. When he comes in, he pretty much plays at a fairly consistent level. Um, and there's value in building a squad. When we talk about the absurdity of having 35 or 40 players and having to whittle down the squad, that those 15 to 22 players, in the squad size, if they can be this kind of profile where if they need to come in for any extended period, because you do get injuries just from bad luck at times, impact injuries, ACLs, these kind of things happen, you know, having that kind of player is hugely important.
Yeah. I mean, I've done this before. If you compare Alistair Johnson and Greg Taylor, and then you compare Carter Vickers and Scales, it's not a there is quite a difference, right? The right side is, these are just more talented footballers, frankly. But right, because all the other teams know this, that left side gets stressed way more than the right side, actually. And so, Greg Taylor is asked to do a lot more defending than Alistair Johnson. Liam Scales has to do a lot more defending than Cameron Carter Vickers, and that they manfully get through that workload. And the availability thing, and James said fitness is a skill, absolutely. And Greg Taylor may not be the quickest, but he's probably arguably the fittest player at Celtic. Right? He is one fit lad. Liam Scales, he's left-footed, left-sided centre back, hen's teeth, right? And he's available. I mean, we saw Stephen Welsh, I would say, is a more talented footballer, but the guy can't be trusted to last 60 minutes on a football pitch. That's no good. That is no good to a coach, even with 5 subs, because you're wanting to change your more dynamic positions during a game, not your centre back. You're looking for consistency, not just of performance, but of actually being there. And I don't know where we go with Scales now, because this happens all the time. Just as a side note, I thought Navratsky was excellent against. I know the game was like nothing, but I thought he was excellent actually. And he looked a fairly accomplished
Mm.
footballer. I know it wasn't a stressful situation, etc. But just throw that one out there.
I think it was a lovely little bit of contrast in himself and Scales in that he was not tested defensively at all, stress wise, but he was pinging the ball, absolutely battering the ball at people, which I thought was a nice little. This is what he's quite good at, which is what Scales is probably weakest at. But we have seen that under pressure situations, Navrosky so far has not dealt with it. It's unfair to say that is what he would do at a consistent basis because we haven't seen that. But the key thing is, as you're saying, that we have seen Scales do it at a consistent basis, and he's been absolutely fine defensively. So loads of room to maneuver there. We'll talk more in depth about moving forward and improving these positions in our season review next week. But let's get into the final then tomorrow. Not the FA Cup final. There is a Scottish Cup final
Who cares about
tomorrow.
that?
Not going to talk about Manchester United. I promise you. I promise you. Although it could be Eric Ten Hag's last game. No, we're not going to. We're not.
Who cares?
Stop trying to drag me into it. Stop trying. So, given all that we've said here, the form team is Celtic. The key players have got a rest. I'm not going to say it's going to be a rout, Alan, because Scottish Cup finals are Scottish
No.
Cup finals, and anything can happen. But form is with Celtic, and you would say that based on what we've said so far, Celtic are favourites going into this game.
Yeah, I mean they have to be. I mean, we could probably manufacture a bit of debate about a couple of the positions, but not really. It's going to be more or less. It's going to be the team that started against Kilmarnock, other than Kyogo. I mean, they're terrified of Kyogo. There's no way Kyogo doesn't play in the final. No way at all. So that will be the team. I don't think we could argue, oh, will Forrest play? Yeah, I think he will. Maeda will play. Scales will play for sure. It'll be the normal back four really. So there's nothing really much to be said. We just got to hope that the team continue to play with the sort of calmness, authority. These are qualitative words that I'm using there, but that's just how it looks to me. And dominate the game, and that it really all of the unknowns and all of the intrigue is really on the other side because we just don't know what 11 they're gonna put out, and they've only got one do John Sterling. I think it seems like they need five. five. They need one in central midfield, one at centre back, one at right back, one at left back, and one on the right wing. The right wing. Yeah, I think there's a lot of uncertainty and unknowns there, and that can cause variance. That can cause but will it worry Celtic? Will it stop them? Will they change the way they're going to play? I don't think it really will. So we just got to hope that the team continue to play with, as I say, the authority, the calmness, the purpose, the speed, the cohesion that we've seen over the last couple of months of the season. And if we do that, I don't know what the score is going to be, but Celtic should win. But it's a cup final, and crazy things can happen.
James, you've spoken ahead of the derbies a couple of times this year about the way that they set up their team, and then you've been pleasantly surprised that they didn't do it the way that you thought would help them. Um, Given the list of injuries they potentially could have, can they set up in the way that you think in that sort of defensive mid block that can be very difficult to play against?
Yeah, I mean, their inherent problem is at center back now. I mean, just because of availability. So depending on, Clement, I think this week talked about maybe taking some risks on fitness. So I don't know who he's applying that to, whether it's Sema or Goldson or, who kind of
It won't
fits
be
into that
Golson. It won't
category
be
for
Golson.
them. Yeah, I don't think so.
Mm,
Yeah, I think that was more of a serious
mm.
one. Ridvan. So, I think I would be most worried if they set up with Diamande and Sterling as those kind of two sitting midfielders, um, with Silva as the number 10. And then, because that to me would create, a blend of athleticism, talent, and skill in the middle of the pitch that would at least theoretically create issues for us. Um, and outside of that, who they put on the, Scott Wright or whoever else they put out on the wing, McCausland. I think and that's I've the thing that I've been happy about is that Clement seems to have prioritized that width and that wing play in his selection and sacrificed the middle of the pitch, meaning that going with Ludstrom and you know, uh, regardless of Lawrence or Pretty Boy at number 10, like that, no matter what mix
Tweety pie.
of those players available. What's that?
Tweety pie.
What was that, Alan?
Tweety pie.
Tweety Pie.
Yeah,
Yes, yes.
release me from my cage.
um, right,
Yeah.
right. So regardless of what he's done, he's kind of conceded that in the middle of the pitch, and I still think we have some vulnerabilities there. Because of Hatate McGregor, um, and just kind of the scatter plot of speed, size, and strength. So that's where I would be more concerned. But even if they did that, because of their issues in defensively, we should still be able to score against them. I think it's an issue of whether they have a puncher's chance, um, and more of things like officiating and you know, keeper play and finishing have a big part to play in the outcome, or whether it's more of what it has been, which is a comfortable, generally speaking, game state, scoring early or being first to score, and kind of seeing it out. Ideally, I mean, I could also see this going completely off the rails in our favor. um, if he ends up getting it wrong, quote unquote, and we end up scoring early, then yeah, I mean that could absolutely cascade, and you could see 3-0, that kind of. Although you know, I'm in perpetual mode that they'll probably score somehow. That just seems to be the way that we've played this season. So 3-1, 4-1, that kind of thing also wouldn't
Mm.
surprise me. So I think it's heavily skewed in our favor, and longer term, I think the most interesting aspect of this final is how Clement responds to this stress testing, because he's been pretty putrid too. um, Coming down the nine game stretch that I've been talking about. Um, so has he learned anything? Is he gonna go? I haven't listened to any of their podcasts, but I've seen some of the people I follow on Twitter, and I saw Clement's comments about playing Lundstrom and not caring what fans think.
Excellent.
Um, you know, Yeah, I'm not always one to go with the common sentiment, but I think the common sentiment generally is correct on this one within the Rangers support and not wanting to see Lundstrom again. Um, but again, he's limited in options, so that'll come down to how he decides to do it. So I think
Mm.
that's probably the most interesting aspect of this is how Clement responds under these kind of circumstances.
Mm. Well, we're not a Rangers podcast, so I don't want to go too far into it. But if you actually just generally look at their squad, I mean, at the end of the season, it could be Goldson gone. Would be surprised if Tavernier sticks around. Tweety Pie might be gone. Lindstrom's gone. I mean, like there is a core.
Barisic, yeah, Barisic
Barisic
will
is
be gone.
gone.
The ones,
You know, like you would be surprised if they didn't lose like 6 to 7 players who are regular enough in their squad. So that either is the opportunity to get things right, like Celtic did a couple of years ago, or it's a decimating situation, especially given the fact that Celtic have Champions League football on.
I mean, I think they've started to try, I think, to look at younger players that may have a resale value. But as we know, and especially if you're buying in that sort of 2 to 3 million range, it's really risky, and you get a lot wrong. So if that's the way they're going, it probably makes better sense than what they have been doing. To chase this title, they brought in a lot of experienced players, really, the likes of Kieran Dowell, Butland, Lammers, Dessers, Balogun got brought back. Dino's not young, all on big wages, right? The ones that you mentioned there, a lot of them are under contract, and someone's for them to leave, someone's got to want them, right? I mean, you know, so not being flippant, but that's how it goes. So, um, yeah, listen, we're getting into, as you say, we're getting into the summer conversation, so we'll probably park that one there for now. But the point that the underlying to what you're talking about there is that this is a group of players who a significant number of them are, either the ones that are out of contract, then the experienced ones are like, well, how much, to what extent are you going to put your body on the line? You know, if Barisic does get selected because Yilmaz is injured again, if Lundstrom does play, and and I've said to you before, Lundstrom will play for himself, right? That's just the nature of the man that he is. So, what are you going to get out of these players that are not going to be there next season for sure? Tricky. It's very tricky. And then versus throwing in a McCausland or the lad that played Fraser, the lad that played left back. These are the. I mean, Clement does seem a very quite pleasingly belligerent and stubborn kind of guy, and I'd actually be really surprised if Lundstrom doesn't start, right? Because he's that's almost a hill he's prepared to die on, which is brilliant. A midfield of Lundstrom, Diomande, and Tweety Pie would be excellent for Celtic in terms of controlling that midfield. I don't know what the situation is with Matondo. There's no hint that he might be fit. But if they had Matondo and Sema, I would be kind of a little bit concerned because there's some unpredictability and variance that they bring. They're not terribly consistent players, but they bring speed, they bring pace, bring goal threat,
They
etc.
sure are fast.
Very fast.
Like
Mhm.
Forrest Gump, they sure are
Yeah,
fast.
that would be a concern. And you know, I'm shifting on Dessers. I think Dessers has been really good for them. And
I
actually, I
agree.
think I think he gets a
It's
really bad. I mean, he's the only one that's fit, right? So he's a plays. He's a bit like the Greg Taylor thing. He's there every week. Whatever you say about him, good, bad, or indifferent, he's
Mm.
there every week. He has scored goals. I know he misses a lot, but I looked at the stats bomb data and did a comparison between Dessers and Shankland because they're all demanding that Shankland be signed and they want Shankland in and Dessers to be sent off because he missed a few chances, what have you. There is no comparison. There is no. Dessers is by far a better player than Shankland. It's not even close, right? So you got there's the element of kind of be careful what you wish for, and coming back to the game, the risk is that Dessers does have a good day because he is a strong lad. He does hold the ball up well. He can bring others into play, and he does get himself into good conditions. His average XG per game is strong, right? He does get a lot of chances, and if they go in on that day, then we might be in trouble. So for all his own supporters get on his back, I think he's one that we need to be very careful about, and hopefully
Mm.
Carter Vickers is given the job of marking him.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I suppose the reason I bring up the aspect of their squad is that it contrasts very nicely with our own squad, and as much as form on the pitch is important, the form in the personal lives of the players is quite important as well. And the difference between what Lundstrom is going through or what Barisic is going through is that this is the end of their time at Rangers after a very unsuccessful period. Whereas if you contrast that with, say, Matt O'Reilly, for example, who we all expect to leave the club, this is his opportunity to go out on a high. The exact same with the likes of Joe Hart, who clearly wants to finish his career on a high. So, I mean, the negative you've got one aspect, you've got players going in with a sort of a negative mindset in that if we lose this game, this is another aspect of failure from my time at this club. Whereas you've got players like Joe Hart and Matt O'Reilly with this is another medal in my pocket from an unbelievable time at this club. So that's sort of why I bring it up. I guess final word on the starting lineup. Um, James Forrest is probably the only person that you're thinking is a questionable one if he starts or not. Outside of that, I think the team's pretty much set. But even James Forrest, I think, is a pretty nailed on starter for this game, right?
I would think so and hope so. I'd be
Yeah.
really surprised if not, unless there's some kind of, he picks up a knock today, or you know what I mean. Like there's always last minute type of things. But yeah, I would be surprised, actually shocked. I mean, if we just don't see, as Alan said, the same team that played Kilmarnock with Kyogo at striker.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was a short conversation. The last question is then the annoying predictions. I'll get your prediction for the game after this, but we may as well just do it now and get it out of the way. If it goes to penalties, do Celtic win?
Oh, fucking
Uh,
hell. Um, uh, yeah, I mean, yes, but no confidence in that
yeah,
whatsoever. I mean,
yeah,
they better, otherwise I don't think I could take it.
yeah. If it goes that far, something's gone badly wrong, I think. But yeah,
Right.
we've scored 11 and missed 6 from open play. I saw somebody looked at penalty success rate over maybe nearly 10 seasons actually, and we're at like something like low 70s, right? So Celtic are consistently bad at penalties, right? Whereas the opposition success against Celtic is over 80%, right? So yeah,
Yeah, I will believe
we
that.
are historically just not good at
It
either
certainly felt that way.
end.
Do you know what? Like, as much as I'm sad to bring any sort of negativity towards Joe Hart's last game before we actually get into the nitty gritty of his career next week. I mean, there are fewer keepers in the world that I have less confidence in saving a penalty than Joe Hart. It's a short
Fair
list.
enough. Yep.
Right. What about the game itself then? I'm a 3-1 Celtic win to get my cards on the table early.
That's actually what I was thinking as well. I think I think the baseline, because of their availability of players versus the last couple of derbies, I think has moved in our direction. And I was kind of 2-1 in the last one. I think I'll inch that out a little bit, so I'll agree, kind of 3-1.
Yeah, I was thinking about 2-0, and the reason for the nil was I take the point that we just don't seem to got to keep a clean sheet in these games, but um, it's just the fact that if you look at the last 2 games, even I know 3-3 at Ibrox, I know that they came back, they won the Moral Cup and all that, but the key aspect of that game for me was outside of that ludicrous penalty, they didn't manage a single shot on target in a game that they had to win. And similarly, at Celtic Park, they're outside of their goal, they really didn't generate hardly anything. And I just think, a weakened team. I don't see where they're gonna. If the likes of Sema, Matondo aren't playing, I just don't see where they're gonna. Outside of a set piece, really, and even then, because of the problems they've got in central defence. They're even depleted in terms of set piece strength because of their defensive injuries that they've got. So even that's less of a stressor.
And and just generally, Alan, they've been pretty poor on set pieces
Yeah,
this season, which has been different. That's been a
yeah,
change versus prior
yeah.
seasons.
So
Yeah,
hence that's why I'm
agreed.
going to go with a nil. And also I don't think Celtic will be allowed to get more than 2 goals ahead. I'll just leave it at that for all sorts of social reasons. The safety of the good citizens in the surrounding areas of Hampden and George Square. I'm thinking of here.
Yeah, yeah. I will be either going straight to Georgia Square or avoiding it at all costs, depending on how the game goes tomorrow. So, if you're about and you see me, say hello. I'm not going to the FA Cup final in case that's not blatantly obvious at this point. And if Celtic win, hopefully we'll have
Party
a
time.
few pints
Party time.
in Glasgow tomorrow night. Yeah, absolutely. Right, that's where we will park the show for this week. Thanks to everybody for listening, and to Alan and James as always. Hopefully, we will have another celebratory podcast for you next week in the aftermath of a Scottish Cup win. Until then, we'll chat to you later. Enjoy the game, and we'll see you next week.